Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Dr. Jason Ramirez has written an autobiography with a message. Yes, you can. He hopes to inspire people, young and old, to realize no matter what the circumstances, they can rise above and be the person they want to be. The name of his book, The Hard Way, A Doctor's Fight Against Addiction, Poverty, and Depression.
So background on a little bit. Self-published this book a few years ago, 2017, through Amazon. And then there was no marketing, nothing. Nobody knows about the book. So I was talking to somebody who actually read my book and was inspired by it to write her own book and her own story. And she was like, you have to sign with a book company if you want your message to get out there. And so last summer I signed with Fulton Books. And that's where I am now.
Right.
Speaking to you. I've been told for many years, you need to write your story. But I always thought, well, everybody has a story. Why are people going to read mine? But then I had to remember, well, if I had not read an autobiography, then I probably wouldn't have gone into medicine. So an impact of another person's life struggles and success inspired me to do something with kind of my future. So if that story did that for me, maybe mine can do it for others. And I already have like some really just heart-wrenching examples of how people have come up to me and said, I want to share what reading your story has done for me. And that's pretty crazy. That's, I don't see myself as very special, but the impact that we can have on other people is quite humbling.
Yeah, I remember being 17 when I read an autobiography. It was Gifted Hands by Dr. Ben Carson. And I probably would not have gone into medicine if I did not read that book. I identified with kind of his struggles in childhood, though slightly different, and saw that, well, he succeeded. And I thought, well, you know what? I want to be like that guy. And so I thought, well, heck, if my life was impacted by reading somebody's story, then maybe if I write my story, it can impact somebody else in a positive way like that. So that's really what drove me to write my story.
So what is your story?
I talk about kind of growing up in a home. Both my parents had heroin addictions. There was a lot of, that's all I ever knew growing up, watching them withdraw, watching them shoot up, watching friends come over and overdose. But you don't know any different when you're a kid. You just, okay, this is what life is like. And, we bounced around from apartment to apartment because usually we were getting evicted. And there were periods of homelessness that, spent a fair number of time in homeless shelters as a family up until probably 14 years of age, when things not really changed, but we got a little bit of help. My parents never stopped with their addiction, and their lives were cut short, both of them in separate ways, but because of the addiction. But I don't want people focusing on that part. Yes, the childhood was not quote unquote ideal, and it was rough and all that jazz. But that I had no control over that, right? I had to live in it. I had 3 younger sisters, and fortunately, I say they were younger sisters, and I was, in my opinion, the primary caregiver for them, really since I was like 9, with my first sister. I honestly think that kept me out of trouble because I couldn't do anything. I had to watch them. My summer vacations were not summer vacations, et cetera, et cetera. I think that was a good thing. But it's what that did to me in my young adulthood, and how that affected me. I became probably a very bitter young man, chip on the shoulder. I set my goal on going to medical school, and anybody and everybody that went to Emory University, where I went to undergrad, they were all pre-med. So in my mind, to succeed, I had to beat every single one of them. And I didn't do it in any, wrongful way, but it was, again, with a chip on my shoulder. Didn't make any friends. Had periods of depression that got worse and worse throughout the years, that led to problems during my residency trainings. When after you graduate med school, you do residencies. Actually had been released from one of my residency programs due to the effects of the depression, which could have ended the career right there. Chose not to let that happen, and was fortunate enough to get another opportunity. But it's the consistent, and it was me putting myself probably into those scenarios where I kept getting knocked down. I kept doing things that could have set me back or eliminated any potential for a future in medicine. And in ways that maybe I could have done better, but I always said, no, I'm not accepting. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to do, and so I'm going to do it. And fortunately for me, things in the end worked out. I've had I'm now 51. I've had a very successful so far 20-year career in medicine. I was in private practice. I was in academic medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine until a couple of years ago, all the way up to what's called residency program director. I ran the residency program for a few years, pretty much the height of medical education. No, that part wasn't for me because I'm not much of an administrator. I realized that pretty quickly, but it turned out very well for me. But the path to get there sure could have been a lot easier. So my hope with writing my story is not that people, oh, poor Jason, he had a rough childhood, which a lot of people understandably say, but that's not the purpose of the book. The purpose was, yeah, I had those challenges. I chose not to let those define what I could become. I set a goal, and I did everything I could to try and achieve that goal. Even as an adult, I still had my own demons, so to speak, with depression, and that kept providing barriers to succeeding. But once I overcame those, I was able to succeed because I just never gave in. Though many, many, many times I would want to, it would have been easier. It just wasn't the path I wanted to take. And so people also struggle. And this isn't people who, oh, you had to have parents who had addiction issues. No, it's for anybody. The message is for anybody who feels, I come from, circumstances that they're not going to, I can't do this because of X, Y, Z. Well, we don't have to believe in that. We decide, and we're the only ones who can decide what outcome our life is going to have. And it's our choice. We're going to make it happen, or we're not going to make it happen. And we all have that ability to make it happen. There's nothing special about me. I'm not a super bright, smart person. I've always worked really, really hard, set a thing, and then chose to not let anything stand in my way. Now, the biggest person standing in the way all the time has always been myself, ironically, but I still kept pushing through it. And to this day, I'm still not perfect, right? I still try and better myself in ways. And now, more on a family standpoint, trying to be a better parent, a better husband, a better doctor. There's still lots of growth. I think we all need to always continuously evaluate ourselves and strive to be better, never settle for complacency. And if people can get that message, it'd be amazing. And I'll share one quick story with you. It just, right there, if another copy of the book was sold, I had this young woman come up to me in the middle of the hospital lobby. She said, "Are you Dr. Ramirez?" And I'm thinking, oh crap. Well, I have a patient. I didn't do something for her. She's mad at me. I'm like, what did I do? And she's like, no, I would love to talk to you. I read your book. I want to share with you how it impacted my life. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. Here's my office. You'll call my assistant. We'll schedule you. Be glad to meet with you. Well, she was from China. She went to medical school in China. To do training in the United States, is a challenge for any foreign medical grad, but she got a training program And at the last minute, about a few weeks before she was about to start, a visa issue prohibited her from doing it. They said, and this was in Baltimore, she's like, I had to go back to China. They said I couldn't come to America and train. I thought my dream of being a doctor was gone. Now, technically, you graduate med school, you are a doctor, but in the States, you have to do a residency program to practice. She's like, I got so depressed. I thought my career was over before it even started. I gave up. And then somehow I found your book. I read it. And I was like, no, not giving up. This is my dream. I'm going to pursue it again. And she miraculously, it's impossible to do it once, never mind twice. She got into a residency, completed it, and is now a practicing physician in the States, which she's like, if I never read your book, I probably would be in China, depressed, doing whatever. So I was like, holy cow, that's just amazing. That's why I wrote the book. Not that it has to be medical, but that somebody said, okay, I'm not giving up on my dream.
Right. But it is the most difficult thing to do. And you are, I think you realize you're the exception, not the rule. Do you talk about in your book, what did you feel from your parents? Anything? Did you ever feel love? Did you ever feel support on any level?
I knew, so it's a great question. So I knew that I always believed that I was loved. They really didn't know how to show that. And my mother maybe more so, but I mean, they were consumed with their addiction. There's just like in my mind, they could have given us up. They just didn't. I feel like they didn't know how to show that love very well. Like people asked, I had somebody recently talking to do you have any memories of hanging with your parents, hanging with your father? It was specifically my father. I was like, I have one memory, but it's like, well, what did you used to do? And I'm like, well, I don't really remember doing anything with my dad. I can't say, oh, I remember, this or that in a positive way. But it's not. I never had any resentment to them. I almost felt for them in a way because I don't think a lot of what they were able to express was under their. Yes, of course, it was under their control, but most of the time they were always high and they'd be nodding off. My mom would be coming out of a rehab, or my father had some spells in jail, but I probably emotionally, and still to this day, probably emotionally closed off. Was like, okay, you know what? I'm here. I have to be here. I have 3 younger sisters. I have to be there for them. And that's where I really believe, I don't know what life would have been like if I didn't have that responsibility. I don't think I had much of a childhood years. And it manifested with kind of poor social skills as in my 20s, right?
Right.
I look back and I think, wow, it would have been nice if I had done it differently, but I don't know that I could have. I thought I did what I had to do to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I'm a totally different person now. Like people, I've been told, they look at me and they're like, that couldn't have been you. You just, it's just too nice. You're too nice. But I'm like, no way, it was. I mean, I was a downright jerk to a lot of people if I felt that they were a threat to my goal. And not in a nasty way. I would never do anything to get ahead or anything like that. It's just I wasn't befriending you. I had one friend who was actually a roommate, quotes on the friend part. He was much smarter than me, but and organic chemistry was one of the classes we had to take in pre-med, and that just happened to be something I excelled in, and he asked for my help. And I said, no, this is my class. You figure it out on your own. I mean, I was just that kind of like, okay, I'm going to beat everybody because they were in med school. It's not easy.
Your book is definitely going to make an impact if you can get it to the people who need it. Or it's going to make people feel like, geez, how come he can do it and I can't? What is it that you have?
About 10th grade, I started noticing, there are some kids, they're getting good grades and their teachers are treating them differently. They're like, they're just, I hate the word teachers' pets, but they're getting more recognition. They're getting some praise, probably something I didn't feel like I had, right?
Right.
And so I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to get that. And once I was like, I'm going to do that, then I just did whatever I thought I had to do. I studied whatever as hard as I could, with the intent of always being better than the other people. Like and that probably came from one of the messages in Dr. Carson's book was, if they can do it, I can do it better. Unfortunately, I kind of took that to another level.
Yeah.
I don't think I was like, okay, fine, you can do that. I can do it better than you. And that's what drove me in the early years, to, again, probably to a point I didn't need to push it to that much, but I didn't know any other way.
Right.
And still to this day, I have a wonderful family. Wife is amazing, 2 kids, but my wife and my son are identical, and they're very laid back, chill, like, let things happen as they happen. And I'm like, no, if you want something done, you gotta get it done. You do it. You don't wait for other people to do it for you.
Right.
And my daughter's 10. She's me through and through. It's quite funny. But that's what, I guess, if you say, what do you have? I don't know. I don't want to let control go to somebody else of what I want my life to be. If you want to achieve something, and I don't care what it is, like I tell patients, I'll tell young teenagers all the time, I don't care what you want to do with your life. I don't care what, just find your passion. The hardest part is finding that passion.
Yep.
That's not easy. That's hard. But once you find it, don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. Figure out what it takes to do that, to become whatever that is, to do whatever that is, and just you go relentlessly after it, and you will achieve it. And I believe that. But if you let it to other people, the odds are, I think, against you. So obviously it's a lot more challenging than that. But that's, if we don't believe that we can do it ourselves, the likelihood that we're going to do it is, drops significantly.
You have a great story, Jason, and you can do a lot of good with this book.
Well, thank you. Maybe I need to work harder. I just probably have to find out direction. Like, I feel like I'm lost in how to do that, how to make it happen,
You'll find it. You will. You have a great day. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Have a good one.
L.A. Ward has published the second book in her trilogy. It's entitled This Road is a Detour, a follow-up to All Roads Do Not Lead Home. Never thought one book would turn into a trilogy, did you?
It ended up that way because in my first book, and you have to understand, some of the stuff that I write is just sort of comes to me. And I was writing about human trafficking in the first book. And as a child, I was either abducted or sold by my mother in Oklahoma into human trafficking. So that's how that all started.
In your book, it's not real.
Not real.
And then when did you get the idea, maybe there's more than one book here?
Well, what had happened is I left it at, well, did my mother sell me? Who is my mother? Did she, was I abducted? Is she sad? Is she looking for me? And so I set on a quest to, all this leads up to me looking for my mother, basically. And then the third book, I'll find my mom.
Where do we find you at the end of the first book? Where does the second book pick up?
The second book, now these books can be separate or they can be together, either one, because the first book is totally about human trafficking. And what I like to do is I like to take social norms that need to be addressed, and then I put those into my book, and then I write a story around them.
Wait, was there any particular reason why you chose human trafficking?
I've worked at some projects, and I've seen human trafficking, and that just came on my radar for the first book.
You worked as a what?
Executive director at different projects.
Like housing projects?
Yes.
And you saw this happening?
Yes.
How disturbing was that?
It was awful. It was awful. And then I started diving into information about human trafficking. And the worst thing that I found was that Oklahoma is the center for human trafficking.
Why is that?
Well, here's the saying that I found, and it just made me want to puke. And it's, if you want good barbecue, go to Kansas City. If you want a little girl, go to Oklahoma City.
What?
Yeah. Isn't that disgusting?
Well, you would just think human trafficking. All right. You would think Los Angeles, New York,
Yeah, no.
Arizona, somewhere along the border.
No.
Why Oklahoma, I wonder?
Well, for one thing, it's those intersections that cross. And so we have a lot of not only drugs, but I found out human trafficking too. And I've been watching the news lately intentionally, and almost every single day a little girl goes missing, whether it's human trafficking or their parents steal them or something. But every single day, almost a little girl or a little boy goes missing.
That's just that's horrible.
It's disturbing.
What's the name of your character in the
Her,
book?
her name, the lady who investigates everything, her name is Victoria, and I live through Victoria basically. She's a
Okay.
shopaholic and she's a chocoholic and she whines and she's strong and she's funny. And the first book, she doesn't fall in love or anything because she just doesn't. She's too busy doing all these other things. And then in the second book, she finds Paul and she falls in love, but he gets shot. So that's where we kind of leave the second book. He's shot by an active shooter because the second book is about bullying. And so we're inside this project and we're working, and an active shooter comes in and shoots him while he's delivering lunch to us.
Has the girl been freed from human trafficking? Who is the girl that's been
Well,
trafficked?
in the first book, yes, there were three girls and they were from my church in the book.
Okay.
And they were freed. I freed them. Yes.
Okay.
And then
And now the one is looking for her mother.
that's Victoria.
So Victoria, the one who's been investigating all along, is looking for her mother.
Right, because I grew up in a place called Hillbilly Hell, and that's in Pennsylvania. And what it does is it ties in at the end of this first book, because I always take, whenever I throw somebody in jail, the next book, I go back and I interview them. Why did you do this? I always want to know why, or how did it start? And so I go back to interview this guy, and he tells me, he said, well, you know what? These girls, they come from somewhere up north. And I think it's a place in Pennsylvania. And I think that the two people's name was Jack and Lucy. And I thought, what? That's who raised me. And I remember, and this is all in the book, of course, and I remember girls would come in and they'd stay overnight and then they'd leave in a white van. They would come in, they'd stay overnight, and they'd leave in a white van. So I was furious. And in the second book, the beginning is I take down Jack and Lucy and shut that down.
Okay, so you're Victoria Ward. You're on a mission.
Yes. And so I took
Okay.
them down, and then I go. And actually, my first book about human trafficking, when I was doing a book signing, I actually met somebody who read my book, and she said, I survived human trafficking. And
Oh,
she was telling me all about it. And it was almost my book to the very detail of everything she went through. Because she got abducted because she answered one of those ads that said, hey, we're taking resumes and we'll do interviews if you just come to this one hotel room, and we have this really great job in your area. And she got abducted.
tell me about your book. How does it play out here?
Okay, the second book is about adult bullying, and people are always bullying each other. I don't know if you've ever realized how much adults bully each other. And
Oh,
what,
it's so much. It's so subtle. Like when you're a kid, it's so obvious, but as you grow up, it
yes,
becomes more subtle, don't you think?
well, and you want to know what the worst part about that is?
What?
I was working at a project and I had two people and they were bullying. One was getting bullied and the other one didn't know what to do and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Right. I called a senator friend of mine, and there are all kinds of laws out there to cover children if they're being bullied, but not adults. So you can tell the police, but if that person didn't kill you or knife you or do something to you, then it really doesn't matter.
So, what kind of bullying is going on in your book?
Well, in my book, what they do is there is a group, and when they find somebody they don't like, they kill them, and they kill them all different ways. So there could be poison, there could be all kinds of stuff.
Well, that's a step beyond bullying.
Well, but that's usually what it leads to. And so they're bullying, and Victoria has to figure out who's doing the bullying and why are they doing this, you know? And so there's all kinds of questions and things that go on. And that's basically how I handle the bullying. And then I find out later on who it was. I put this person in jail. And then my third book, of course, I go back and I interview her.
Okay. And this all somehow leads you back to your mother.
Right. Eventually it
or leads Victoria back to your mother. I don't want this to sound like people, you know, you really are living through your character, including during this interview.
Exactly. I'm sorry. It's hard to keep us straight sometimes.
That's all right.
But I love Victoria. And after this third book, I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't have Victoria. I have to think of something else.
Well, can't Victoria, you know, keep going?
Well, I'm thinking about her and her new husband opening up a private investigating office. That's what I'm thinking about.
Okay.
And we'll see.
Now, have you been writing your whole life?
No.
No, I mean, like, what made you, you know, you were a project manager, you managed projects, housing projects. That's what inspired the story. But in terms of actually writing it, you know, did you ever keep a journal? I mean, was that difficult for you to put it down on paper?
Well, one of my jobs that I had, I wasn't an executive director or anything, but I was working at a project. And I don't know, I hated my job. I wanted to go back to college. And I just felt like I was whining. And I thought, I'm just going to write all this down. So I just started writing everything down. And I found out that if I could write things down and maybe write some of my, you know, frustrations I had that day, and how would I fix them? If I was Victoria, how would I fix that, you know? And so that's how that started. And then eventually I was like, oh, I might have a book here. And then my husband was like, this is good. You should write this in a book.
Great. Nice to have the support, isn't it?
Oh, it is. He's a musician and he loves the fact I write.
Where do we go from here in terms of letting people know about the Victoria Ward crime series?
Well, we have been doing a lot of signings.
How did you set up the signings?
Well, what we've been doing is we did a launch actually in our hometown, and then we have called around to like different places. One of the things we wanted to stay away from, and I know this might not sound really good, but we wanted to stay away from bookstores, only because the small bookstores are not getting a lot of traffic. They take part of your profits. And so one of the things we found is we could go to the mall in a city over, and they never charged us to set up or anything, and there was a lot more traffic that way. And then what we would do is when we go into a city and we're going to actually set up and do a signing, we take out an ad in the paper.
And people come.
And people come.
That's amazing.
Yes, and it was really kind of fun to hear, not fun, but, you know, it was nice to hear some of the stories about, well, I've been bullied or I've been in human trafficking, and it touches a lot of people you would not believe.
I can't tell you, you know, I've been doing this for quite some time, and every so often I interview someone who was a victim of human trafficking.
Isn't that awful?
And what they do and how they've come out of it. It's, it's pretty horrible. And you're right. People don't realize it's pretty widespread. It goes on more than people think. When's the third one coming out, do you think?
Well, I've just got like 150 pages written so far because it keeps changing. I can't decide what did my mother do? Did she sell me? Was I abducted? And so sometimes that process is a little slow because it doesn't come to me right away. But I did bring a character into the third book that was in the first book. He just showed up out of nowhere, and I thought, hey, I'm going to bring him into the third book. And so I'll be able to get rid of him that way.
I have to ask you, what's your process? Do you just sit down and let it come? Are you, not actively pursuing a particular storyline?
No, I usually think about what social norm is affecting me or somebody I know or something I want to address. And then once I figure that out, then I figure out the storyline that goes with it. And in this case, with these three books, I was abducted or something, so I had to deal with all that and going back to the cities where I was abducted. And so they kind of all go together, but they all have separate social norms that I address. And then I do an outline.
And then from there, you fill it in.
Well, yeah, and every now and then, some character will jump into the book that I didn't even think about. Like in the first book, I'm like, where did he come from? And it's like, I know I sound crazy and I'm sorry, but
You don't.
and I was writing about him. So in the third book, I thought, oh no, I need somebody that can take the heat off of these people because we're talking about an angel of death. And so I had to study up about the angel of death. And we're in a senior home and this person's killing everybody. And so I brought this other character back in to take the heat off of some of these other characters.
Oh my God, you are something else. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
You're welcome. Thank you for calling.
Valeria Ortega-Ruiz has her doctorate in education, and she's the author of a children's book. It is entitled Lucas the Wiggly Worm, inspired by a little boy very close to you, right?
It is. It is about my son. Mm-hmm.
How old's your son?
Lucas is my son. He is 9 years old.
Okay.
And he was diagnosed with autism when he was in pre-K.
Okay.
So this whole book is just about him and how we've been navigating it and how wiggly we can all get when he's wiggly. So, and it was a shock to me, myself, my husband, my family. And I want to say I was pretty ignorant on what autism is. You see different stories. And of course, there's no way my son can be autistic. But then this diagnosis just opened up our eyes as to what autism is. And the story kind of gives the reader a perspective on what we've been going through and how our family navigates it through his emotions and his social emotional kind of imbalance that he has there. So that's what the book is about.
Did you notice anything different?
He started speaking rather early as a baby. His math is just, I still use my fingers. So his math is just amazing. He was into geography when he was so small, 3 years old. He started walking so early. But when he went to school, I noticed that there were tantrums happening. At home, there were tantrums happening. He was very rigid when it came to his schedule. If something were to throw off his schedule, that would create a meltdown. When he was playing with his toys, they had to be in exact line, in an exact pattern. That's in the book. One of the things that happened at home, if it wasn't in the exact pattern, exact line, rigidity of what he wanted it to be like, then that would be an issue. So that's when the teacher called us in and kind of had the aha moment, like, there might be something that we need to have checked out by the doctor here. And that's when we went to the doctor and he was diagnosed with autism.
Okay. When you say autism, it's such a broad spectrum.
Yes, it is. Very broad. Mm-hmm.
Is it a book for adults? Is it a book for parents?
I want to say it's a book for everyone. Adults, parents, children, teachers. I have some of my great friends are teachers and they've used it already in their classroom with diverse learners. So it's funny because the things that he says sometimes are funny. So I put that in there. it shows the patience that a parent needs to have. It shows the patience that siblings need to have, because he has two older siblings, two sisters. So it shows just, I want to say, the beautiful chaos that can happen in the home when there's a child with autism. And you kind of have to go with them into their world and then help them navigate back if you see them going off a little, where they're not supposed to go, like a tantrum. So in the book, there's also things that we've done at home, breathing exercises. He loves to bounce. That's why I got wiggly worm from. He loves to bounce. So he has a bouncy ball in his bedroom. And he loves just building things, creating things. So that's also in the book. So there's a little bit of a strategy in there on how we navigated that through that. We still do. So it's definitely for parents, for teachers, for anyone.
Tell me like how you take us through this book.
So when you open the book, it starts with him just like he starts every morning, just like he started today, saying good morning at the top of his lungs. The words are in caps, because that's what he does. He wakes up, and it doesn't matter if it's 6 a.m., everybody's sleeping, or if it's, getting ready for school, 8 a.m., he'll come and he'll say good morning and immediately give you a hug. He's very affectionate. So I put in the I love you. He tells I love you. He loves so easily. So that's where the emotional imbalance comes from. He loves so easily. He can talk to you for 5 minutes and he's already telling you he loves you. So he's just so friendly. So it starts with him saying good morning, welcome to my day, and just sliding down the steps because that's usually how it starts. I have to tell him, you have to walk, be careful, please. We've already had one of those accidents, so we don't have to have another one. And then there's breakfast. And breakfast has always been kind of a tricky area, whether it's breakfast or lunch or dinner, because he is just very, very picky when it comes to eating. If it's not one of his favorite meals, he won't eat it. So unfortunately, we've combated that a bit, and he's tried new things. So, but in the book, when I wrote the book, it was all about frozen pancakes and strawberries. He's still a strawberry fiend. Strawberries has to be in his lunch bag every single day. So it starts with, yeah, definitely. So yeah, and then it starts with breakfast, and at the table, I try to get him to start eating new foods, and he won't have it. So then the crying happens. So that's the first little meltdown we have early in the book, because that's usually how it happens.
How do you deal with the meltdowns? Do you talk about that in the book?
I do. So it's so the book is through the lens of Lucas. So Lucas is speaking to the reader. He's speaking to the reader. He's telling them, welcome to my house. Let me show you everyone. And then there's conversation in the book. So the conversation is between Lucas and anyone in the home. So when he does melt down, then we sit down and I ask him questions. Why are you feeling like this? What's going on? Why do you feel like this? Is there something that we can do to make it better? Give him options. How about we do this? And then we go back to this. So there's a scene in the book where he's playing with blocks and there's a pattern, blue, orange, blue, orange. And his sister Emma is also playing with blocks, and she has the next color that he needs. And she won't give it to him because she's playing with it. So they're only 1.5 years apart. So, that's
a problem.
She won't give it to him. It's a problem. It's a problem. So there goes the meltdown, the tantrum. And the first thing I do is ask him what's going on. Can you explain to me why you feel like this? Why are you crying? And then when he calms down, because the important thing is to tell me while you're calm, because when you're not calm, I don't understand, so I can't help you. So let's breathe, calm your tears, and then let me know what's going on so we can work through it. So that's what we do, and then we figure out a different pattern to do with the blocks he has, so it doesn't change anything. and then we move on from there.
You must have a tremendous amount of patience. I think as a parent, you have to have a tremendous amount of patience, right?
Yes, you definitely need it. Even just a parent in general. You need. I have three
Well,
kids.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
have three kids. So Lucas with autism, Emma, his sister, a year and a half apart. She has a learning disability, and then I have an 18-year-old. So the gap in between those two
Wow.
and she's off to college. So that was also something we had to navigate. Something recent. So the book I wrote during COVID, and
Okay.
we were doing remote learning at the time. So you'll see that in the book, you'll see us remote learning, and that was a doozy. Remote learning
How was that?
was a doozy. So I had three kids remote learning.
Crazy.
So while they were remote learning, I was writing my dissertation, and at the same time, I was an online professor. So I was and then writing the book. So that's when I wrote the book. So it was,
Yeah.
like I said, beautiful chaos.
Did the online learning set him back at all?
It didn't set him back academically, because he just loves all things reading and math, but I want to say the time it took for him to sit there, sitting still for long periods of time, that was something we definitely had to get creative with. And his teachers understood, because his teachers, he goes to Orange County BOCES, and it's a special education school. So they definitely understand what kind of learning he needs. But being at home, I had to do everything myself. So take the breaks. We even had to do PT, OT at home. And I was there being his second teacher while his teacher was online.
Wow.
Getting through, let's say, a reading comprehension lesson, it had to be a book that he was interested in. So his teachers knew to pull something about space, pull something about stars, about building things, because he loves all this, that stuff. He loves that stuff. So once we got through the book, then we had to get through the questions, and there was definitely a lot of redirection when it came to that. So it was tricky. The social emotional part, that was definitely an area that might have set him back, being on the computer the whole time. But when it was finally
Right.
time to go back into the building, they switched his teacher. So, that was a day. That was a day.
That was
Because
difficult.
yes, that was very difficult. He for weeks, his prior teacher had to come and say good morning and give him a hug, and also reintroduce the new teacher for 2 weeks. And it took him about 2 weeks to get used to the new teacher. So that was tough.
So how do we wind up the book?
We go through his day. We do remote learning. We do playtime. Then we have dinner. Again, the usual, only chicken, nothing extra type
Oh,
of dinner. And then it's bedtime. Get ready for bed. They tend to love to race up the steps. And if he doesn't win, then that's an issue. So we had to navigate through that. And then it's going through to bedtime. And usually bedtime takes about a few minutes, maybe half hour, because he loves to ask questions about how do you buy a house? How does the stock market work? Yes, but questions that I don't know the answers to. I don't know anything about stock market. So definitely we make a list of things we have to Google when we wake up. And he always tells me his brain just doesn't stop. So we sometimes just do a little breathing, noise machine, a few lights, dim lights, blue lights, calm him down. And that's how he gets to sleep. He does wake up during the night, maybe twice. So I have to put him back into his bed, give him another hug, and then he's off until the morning. So that's our day.
What's the takeaway for parents reading this book?
The takeaway is just autism it sounds scary for those who don't know much. You may read scary things, it may look scary to someone, but it's really a beautiful concept of another version of being a person. His brain works in ways that mine doesn't. And it's just amazing to watch when he goes through these things with his brain, with his science and math, and his love is just unconditional. And that's something that some people can't do. So the takeaway is just don't be afraid to learn about new things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be kind. The book is really, like I said, for everyone. So anyone can read it. It's and hopefully I want to create another one about Lucas going to school, going through his school day at the school building. So it's just, like I said, for anyone to enjoy.
He sounds like a brilliant child.
Thank you. Thank you.
Super smart. He sounds super smart. I mean, is he going to be okay? Do you think he'll get to the point where he'll be able to live by himself? Take care of himself?
I think so. Not far from mom, because I'd rather have him clean up. You want all your children close to you. But I definitely want him close to me. But he already has his future planned out. So his plan is to either become an engineer, a dentist, or a game designer. Totally different different ways to go, right? And not get married, not have kids, buy a Honda Civic, and that is his life. That is his life.
And he's 9. He's 9.
And he's 9. He's 9.
Wow.
And that's it. That's his life.
So maybe we'll get to follow him throughout his life if you keep writing.
Yes. Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. I would love to share that story.
What's your plan? Do you want to get this book in schools or?
So I have gone to a few libraries around my area, and they were very welcoming for the book. One of them offered to have me come back in November to have kind of a circle time where I can read parts of the book and invite families, parents, kids. So that would be amazing. So I'm waiting to hear back from her about scheduling for that in November.
That's a great idea.
And I also reached out to a few school districts, mainly where my kids go and where I've worked before, into their libraries. So the high school did reach back out, and I did send my book to them. So they were very happy about that, because within the high school, there's also a preschool. So they will be using it for that. I have many friends who are teachers still with elementary, and they've used my book with lesson plans. I do have a lesson plan ready with the book that can accompany the book, written by one of my good friends, and she's a certified special education teacher. It's a beautiful plan. So I can share that with teachers too. So and then the social media, my Facebook, my Instagram, right, in different groups. I'm a part of a few mom groups, so I put it on there. So far, that's what I've done.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.
Michael Berkowick loves baseball, and he's always wanted to write a book, and now his dream comes true with Buddy and the Blue Sox.
I've always wanted to be a writer. I wrote in college. I took classes in writing short stories, and I wrote several. I started writing Buddy and the Blue Sox. It's been more than 25 years ago that I started.
Wow.
I finally got to the point where I had a manuscript ready to send to a publisher, and it was a major publisher. Yeah. And they rejected the manuscript, but they sent me a very kind letter, 3 pages long, telling me about the good points and the suggestions that I could possibly use to make it even better. I read that, and I felt a little discouraged. And I put the manuscript down for several years, probably 5 years, before I decided I got to look at their suggestions and see what I can do to make this a better book. So I did, and I revised some significant parts of it, and now I have the book published.
Is the book based on an experience close to you?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I've always loved baseball. My father taught me how to play baseball. He and I went to see professional games. Our favorite team was the Detroit Tigers. He coached me. We played catch in the backyard all the time. He taught me everything I needed to know about baseball, or everything that I could possibly learn. And he supported me in every way.
Is there any truth to the story?
No, it's not based on any kind of reality.
Okay.
It just came out of my head.
Okay. So tell me the story.
Well, it's about Buddy and the Blue Sox, the team that he plays for, and the coach that they all idolize. And the story talks about Buddy, who was the starting catcher on the team. And then all of a sudden, a new boy moves to town. And he's also a catcher. And the new boy, whose name is Ben, wins the starting position. And Buddy is relegated to the bench. And he gets, of course, he's very disappointed about that. But he talks to his father. His father said, well, maybe you should just get a job and get ready for college. But he also talked to his grandfather, who said, I think you ought to get back on the team, and I think you ought to go out for a new position. So he followed his grandfather's advice, and he started playing a new position. So the season proceeded with Buddy now playing first base and Ben as catcher. And at first he didn't like Ben because Ben beat him out, but they became friends. And Buddy and Ben and other members of the team, Freddie, Joe, they came together as a team and they won several games, but they did not win the championship. Of course, they were very disappointed about that. But Coach Ted, he told them that's what life is like. You gotta take the losses with the wins. And so then at the end of the story, Coach Ted, who is in the Army, is assigned to go to Vietnam. And he has to leave the town where he was coaching. Of course, this is very, very upsetting to everybody, especially Buddy. But when you're in the Army, you go where they tell you to go. And so that was the end of the story, with Coach leaving and Buddy watching him leave. And I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Shane.
Yes.
I reread that. I rewatched that movie, and I decided to borrow a few lines from the very end of the movie, where the young boy, whose name I forget, watches Shane. Shane had been living at their house and working for his father, and it's time for him to move on. And he watches Shane ride his horse off down the road, and he follows after him and he says, "Come back, Shane, come back." And that's how I ended my story. With Buddy saying, "Come back, Coach, come back."
Oh.
Those are the last lines of the book.
Will there be a sequel?
No, there won't be a sequel. I don't know what else to say about Buddy.
Yeah.
But I am thinking about writing another book. If I do, I don't know if I told you my age. I'm 78.
Okay.
So I don't know how much more time I have left for this. But if I sit down to write it, I think I'm going to write a story about Vietnam.
Mm.
My father was a career Army soldier. He spent 30 years in the military. He was in Korea, and before that in World War II. So I feel like I could handle a subject like that because I know something about the Army through my father.
Right. Well, but as far as this book goes, how are you sharing it?
I have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren.
Okay.
And of course my wife, and I've given each of them a copy. I inscribed each one to them personally,
Okay.
each of them personally. And I've decided I'm not going to ask them any questions like, have you read it yet? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait for them to come to me. I know my wife has read it, and she liked it too, which I was very happy about.
There's a great lesson here.
Thank you.
And one we all have to learn sooner or later.
Yeah, yes, we do. We learn through our failures probably more than we learn from our successes.
That's right. That's right. It's not how you fall, it's how you get up.
That's right. Exactly.
Good job, Michael. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And let me just add one more thing.
Okay.
You may or may not have noticed I dedicated this to my father.
Yeah.
And he was my inspiration. He died many years ago, but he was my inspiration.
Yeah.
So I wanted to tell you that.
You got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Alfred Hazel describes himself as a jack of all trades, having done a little bit of everything throughout his life, including working for Donald Trump at the Woolman Rink in Central Park. Now, he adds author to his list with his book, Spiritual Rise Before I Die.
I decided last year to write. A friend liked some of what I wrote, so they suggested it. But it took years before I got to it. Like, I'm not a professional writer, but I decided to write to give something back to the society in which I myself have been a problem to, because in my youth, which I squandered, going contrary to doing what was right and best for me.
What'd you do?
I got caught up in the streets. Drugs, the penitentiary, jail. And, by the time I acknowledged God, a good part of my life was already gone.
What did you go to jail for?
Robbery.
Oh, boy.
It goes with the lifestyle the hazards of the lifestyle of using drugs, and when the money is not there and you have a habit, you have to go for what you know.
Right. So you found God, and that's when you decided to write this book?
Yes.
When was that?
That was last year. My acknowledgement of God, I believe, came late in life. It wasn't always there. I was one to say it was my mother that put the food on the table, So,
yeah.
So, I wasn't really into God or spirituality. Like I said, it came late in life, and acknowledging God, right? Acknowledging his three major holy books, I started to change. I started to change my attitude. I started to change things that I didn't do before, saying good morning to people, have a good, blessed day, and just changing overall, trying to do the right thing. I figure whatever I didn't do in my youth and when I was running the streets, it was time to make that change.
Is this your story, like an autobiography?
You could say in part is an autobiography, but it's like letting people know as well, what becoming spiritual meant to me. Because I'm Muslim, right? But
okay.
You can't become Muslim unless you accept the Torah, which is the Holy Bible, the Gospel, which is the New Testament, along with the Holy Quran, from one God. And the Holy Quran is the seal of the holy books and prophets, where there'll be no more books or no more prophets. So, and, but my writing was like, in general, letting people know how spirituality, because I'm more spiritual than anything, than following this particular faith and their traditions, because mankind has improvised a lot as far as, the faiths are concerned. So I wrote the book speaking in general and what spirituality has done for me.
What has it done for you?
The change.
It's helped you to change.
The change of trying to do things right and correct. Like you can never become perfect because we was created weak just so we could be tried and tested. Like it's like people use the word, well, we have choice, but we don't have the same choice that Adam and Eve had. We have limited choice because after Adam and Eve, God seen that he still had to be in our lives and had to intervene when it was necessary. So, my change is, just doing things correct as much as possible and trying to keep the devil out of my head.
Did this book help you to do that?
Yes, very much so. Because I don't just speak about me and what it has done for me. Things I wrote in there is to encourage other people that you need a spiritual base. It has nothing to do with the religions and the faiths, to the point that you got to be a part of something, but you just got to have that faith and belief that there is a God and that besides answering to mankind, we have a God that we have to answer to in the end. So, it's best, to become as spiritual as possible. Like I said, you could never be 100% perfect.
Right.
Because you're going to continue to make mistakes, that, we call sins and, be it mistreating somebody or just doing something wrong, you don't have no business doing.
Right.
Because one of the greatest rewards is to be of service to another human being.
How long were you in prison?
I was in prison for 8 years before I got out, and then I relapsed in the street once again, where I had to go back for another like a year and a half, because the whole sentence was 8 1/3 to 25.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I've been run through the mill.
Yeah. And how do you get this message out to other people who need it?
Well, I'm also programming, like to make sure that I stay away from drugs, substances, and having groups, in this here program. You talk to other people to bring them around, that, they can find themselves. Because a lot of times we start out, say like in our teens, we think we know ourselves, to the point that we young adults, but we really don't have an idea of what life is all about.
So true. That is so true.
Yeah, because the University of Life is an ongoing education where there's no semester breaks. I mean, be it you learn from somebody that has passed or somebody that's living, there's an education and a lesson in it, And those are the things that we have to grasp on to, to continue on, and once you do come into yourself and come into spirituality, you have a better chance of succeeding at whatever you might want to do.
Are you going to keep writing?
I'm thinking about it because I have a lot of ideas, whereas that was just me in part, but there's a whole lot more to write about, that I've thought, because at 74, right?
Yeah.
And having arthritis, having my spine bent from left to right because of the hazards of my lifestyle, it's, I was thinking of a book like to write about more of the technicality of using drugs, and going contrary to what life is really about.
Right.
And I was thinking about writing further on that.
Okay.
Otherwise, self-infliction in creating a medical minefield for yourself, because that's what drugs do, When you find yourself, sick, once you start aging and all the things you didn't do right, even as far as your health, and especially as far as your health.
Yeah.
And then you get older and they want to throw all these different things at you, but the damage is already done physically, and those are those things I continue to write about.
Well, I give you a lot of credit, Alfred. It takes a lot of, strength to put your story out there. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thanks so much for talking to me today.
You're welcome. You're welcome a lot. Thank you for giving me this here interview. And you have a blessed, safe day and get home safe.
You too. All righty. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Breaking Point by Robert Roche is the third book in a trilogy, but Robert worked with another publisher on the first two books before he landed with Page. So tell us how this all worked out.
The idea was that you could really pick up any of them and read them. You might miss a reference or two if you read them out of order, but I don't think it would disrupt the flow of the reader or confuse them. It might just be something they're just not aware of, but then when you see it as a whole picture, it paints a sort of a different image that you didn't see the first time.
Okay. Have you always been a writer?
When I was back in college, I used to write a lot of fan fiction for various series. For example, one of them was based on a Japanese manga called Naruto, as well as other material that I always enjoyed. And what happened is, even though it was well received by my friends, one of them actually challenged me, said, "Why don't you write your own original story instead?" And I guess I could say I sort of rose to the challenge my friend had proposed to me. And when I was thinking about what I should write, I always go by the philosophy you should always write about what you know or what you're familiar with. And my first novel, A War on Two Fronts, takes place during the Second World War, sort of an homage or to honor my grandparents who both fought in the war.
Okay, so how long ago did you do that?
Oh, that was actually back in 2001. You see, when I was starting to get into the idea, I did want to write my own story. But of course, with work and social life, that sometimes can always be a little difficult to balance and juggle. However, actually, right after I started thinking about it, we were hit with COVID. And if one good thing came out of it, it actually gave me the time to sit down to write my story, put it all out, and then find an editor who helped me eventually review and publish it.
Yeah, there were so many people told me that same story. It's like, the one good thing that came out of COVID. But where did you come up with Peter Cobb and, the mafia and loan sharking? I mean, does that come from your own experience?
Goodness, no. Thankfully, I've never had to rely on the mob or gather any money from them. The entire series is more of a continuous timeline where each one focuses on a different protagonist. And for this particular one, Peter Cobb really is your average Joe who is just down on his luck. He just represents the average person, and part of it was based on COVID, with so many people losing their jobs or struggling to get by. In his particular case, it is a little different. He was part of a scandal that ended up closing his particular branch because he used to work at a bank before he worked at his present job. And once that happened, as I just mentioned, he struggled to make ends meet. He wasn't able to really provide for his family. And in a desperate act, he turned to a place to get quick funds. And once he did, of course, while he was starting to be able to get back on his feet, he had the consequences and weight of the mafia coming after him and wanting their money back. And even though he did eventually get it pay them back, they see him as an easy target, so they continue to relentlessly hound him and try to squeeze a little bit more out of him. So he ends up pretty much, in a sense, almost working himself to death and becomes ill in the process. And from there, he just realizes the only way to get out of this situation is not to continue to play by the rules, but he has to take matters into his own hands if he wants to get out of this and survive. Now, as far as any real-life experience, this particular character does come down with Bell's palsy, which is the temporary paralysis of the face, and funny enough, actually, that happened to me in real life. I actually did come down with that a few years ago, so there was a little bit of that personal touch in there. I wanted to try to focus on an illness that was maybe not really talked about that much in literature, or may not even really be that known. So that was also one of the inspirations for what happens to him and how his path is laid out before him.
So where do we go from here?
Well, of course, we have podcasts just like yourself who's helping me, and thank you. I do appreciate that. I am reaching out to local newspapers. I have been working with Page Publishing with some ideas, reaching out to my local library, of course, telling my friends, my family, my coworkers, just trying to help spread the word as much as I can. It's been out for roughly a month now, and I'd say so far things are going well, but I definitely want to see about bringing it to the next level and really getting that voice out there, letting people really know it's, hey, no, I just don't have one new piece of work for you, but I have a whole trilogy if you're interested.
This is the third book in a trilogy, and you published the other two books with another publisher.
That's correct.
Okay. How did you make out with the other publisher?
I'll be honest with you. They were good. They helped me really get my feet into the game. But I will say they just don't really have the same resources as Page Publishing has. Just, as I always like to say, it's sort of like a mom and pop shop versus Microsoft, so to speak. They just simply didn't have as much resources and pull as Page Publishing, and that was the reason why I actually jumped to a new publisher this time. Just one that seemed to have a better reputation, better resources, better options, and that was a real pull for why I went for them. I had a very healthy and positive experience with them. I will say this, it did take a little longer to get it published with Page, but I think at the end it was really, really worth it. It was the right thing to do to take that extra time.
All right, great. Listen, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate your time too.
All right, you have a great day.
Likewise. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton-Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.